Maybe you're thinking about starting an online business, but you're afraid it's going to be boring and kind of a snooze fest. Or maybe you have an online business and maybe it's becoming a bit of a snooze fest. In this video, I want to share how to keep your business exciting and fun. Also, some ways to stay on track so that you're steadily making improvements versus staying stagnant. And at the end, I want to share some specific steps you can follow to do this and my favorite piece of business advice ever. So let's dive in. First of all, my name is Joe Gilder. If we haven't met, I've been making my living online since 2009 and just celebrated, as of shooting this video, my 15th anniversary of my first business, Home Studio Corner. And that wouldn't have happened without the stuff we're going to talk about in this video. If it had been a snooze fest the whole time, I would have quit long ago. But I've managed to keep it fun and exciting and something that I still, to this day, even though I've done it so much, I'm still very much passionate about it and I still very much love it. All right, so let's jump in. The first big concept that we have to wrap our heads around is business is creative. I think a lot of people sometimes think about business as it's for these really like strong personalities, these hard driving sales types. We just had someone show up at the door yesterday trying to sell us some sort of bug service, right? Spray your house for bugs. And we already have a thing that we use for that and it works well. And my wife said she had to tell him no about 15 times. He was nice about it, but he was very persistent. And that's the thing. If you've ever had a sales job, they probably have you read some sales books where they talk about how to get over the objections and how to argue with your customers and beat them into submission. I know that's not really the heart of it, but that's the idea a lot of people have. At least that's what I had when I thought about what it would mean to start a business. My first job out of college was a sales job. So it was very much a talk to people and try to convince them to buy something. Now, I tried to do it in such a way that they were buying something they really wanted anyway, but it's that idea of I can kind of bully my way to success through business. And the concept of creativity kind of goes out the wayside, right? You don't really tend to think of it as being something that you get to engage your creative side as you're engaging business. If anything, you think those two things are at odds, right? I sure hope I have some chance to be creative while I'm growing this business. Maybe some outlets, I can do some creative things on the side because business is all numbers and spreadsheets and making angry faces and bullying people into submission. It's not that at all. If you are a creative person, you are one of the best candidates to start and grow a business. Your creativity will be like at the core of what you do in your business, which is incredibly fun and kind of gives me goosebumps as I think about it. It will also be a bit of a challenge because as a creative person, you're probably pretty sensitive. I'm raising my hand first to say I am a very sensitive person, which means business is going to hurt my feelings a lot. And it has over the years. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. My first job, not my first job, but one of the jobs I had in college, I was dating my wife. I think we were engaged at the time. I was working at a deli making like $6.25 an hour, and they would only put me on for like 2 hours at a time. Then I would buy lunch after my shift was over. So I'd basically spent my paycheck while working. I got a job with a pay raise up to $12 an hour at the child support office for that county, which was just wild. I've got some wild stories from working there. But my job was just to do grunt work, to put files away when they were done with them and to go find files when they needed them. That was a big part of it. One of my jobs was to sit in front of a computer and to gather all the mail they had sent that had returned to sender with a new address. I had to update the address in the database so they could send more mail to the right address. And then one of my big projects was there was a closet down the hallway that it was probably 15 feet by 15 feet, and it was just piles and piles of boxes of files that they maybe didn't need anymore, but they needed to be able to find them. So my job was to organize it alphabetically in that room. I didn't have shelves, so it was just like from left to right. This left pile is A, B, C. Mindless jobs. Now, a part of me likes a mindless job because I can just kind of switch off, listen to a podcast, listen to the radio, and just do the work. But if that was my career long term, I wouldn't last because just knowing myself, I need a creative outlet. I need to be making something meaningful. And just filing things in boxes, that wouldn't be fulfilling enough for me. I'm not saying some people who do kind of mundane, repetitive jobs that they can't be completely happy and fulfilled in those jobs. That's just not me. And I'm guessing it's not you either if you're watching this video. So what is if we've kind of established that creative people can make really great businesses, and I would argue are maybe the best people to create businesses, then what's the mantra of creative people? What's the thing, like the battle cry as they go into whatever it is they're doing, whether it's creating a business or creating some work of art? This is something I got from Seth Godin, who is a marketing author, but he speaks a lot about creativity and creating what he calls art, which he would consider creating a business as creating a piece of art. And the mantra that he proposes is, "This might not work." That's not quite the thing you would like put on the big billboard for the big game. Let's go team, this might not work. But that's what we do as creative people. We engage in things that by the very nature of what they are, they might not work. I'm a musician, so when I step on stage, it might not work, right? I might forget how to play the song. I might just perform it terribly. I might do okay for a minute and then just bomb, right? There is a chance that when I step on that stage, it's going to just go horribly, horribly wrong. That is always a possibility. Think about if you were in the movie business. I'm always a bit overwhelmed when I get to the end of a movie, like a Marvel movie where everybody stays through the end credits to see the end credit scene. And you sit there watching all these hundreds and hundreds of names scroll up the screen, all these people involved in making one 90-minute movie. And it always overwhelms me because I think, golly, my business is just me and my wife. And I can't imagine doing something so big that it requires literally thousands of people just to make it happen. More than that, they spend millions of dollars, sometimes maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars, to make something before they know if it's going to do well at the box office, right? I mean, how many, you could list movies that they spent a lot of money and it did not make a profit. It did not make more than what they spent to make the movie. It was a flop. That's the world that these people live in, and they have investors who invest money hoping that it becomes a, Star Wars or was Avatar that did really well, which shocks me. I didn't get it. But a lot of times the movies, they spend a lot of money and they don't make any money. That's the same kind of risk that we run, but thankfully the good news is the kind of business that I run doesn't require almost any money up front. Like literally I started my business with maybe a couple $100. I bought a camera, which nowadays you could do it on your phone easily. I bought a domain and set up some web hosting so I can have a blog. Like that. That's it. Compared to the millions that these movie makers are spending, that feels like a pretty good deal. So yes, my business might not work. The song I produce might not work. The movie that they make might not work, but at least our stakes are a little bit lower. Does it feel lower all the time, right? If something doesn't work, it hurts. It stings pretty hard. But the idea is there's not a lot of like tangible risk there. It's just all emotional risk. Silly emotions. I'm kidding. Emotions are important. We'll talk about those a little bit later. So how do you know what works? So if the mantra is, this might not work, and that's kind of the battle cry of let's go into this with some courage and try it because it might work, but it also might not work. So how do you know if something works? That's the ultimate question, right? Someone might say, Joe, I want to start a business around this idea, but I don't know if it's going to work. How do I know what will work? And the answer is, I'm very serious. It's not an answer you're going to like. The answer to the question, how do I know what works, is you don't. Sip of coffee for effect. You can't know what works. Not fully. You can have informed decisions. You can have a pretty good idea or a hint or a nudge or just an inclination of something that might work. Sorry, my nose is itchy. But you can't know. And here's a guaranteed way to make sure you really don't know. The answer is not in the form of surveys, polls, and like comments on social media. That's where a lot of people go. They think, I'm going to say, here's what I'm thinking about starting. Would you be interested? Would you buy this if I created it? And then the poll will tell them yes or no. I understand that polls are a part of society, especially like political side of things, and I'm sure they are helpful to a degree. For business, I find polling to be near useless for coming up with ideas. Especially coming up with the first idea to see if it's going to work. Now, it's valuable to get feedback from existing customers about how they liked the product, how it worked, what they would like to see next, what would be, that's useful information. But as far as saying, I want to start something, what's going to work, and asking an audience, would you buy this? First of all, depends on who you ask, right? If you ask your Facebook friends, your Aunt Mary is going to say, yes, of course I'll buy that, sweetie. Thanks, Aunt Mary, but she probably won't, right? If you know, like I have an Aunt Mary. She's a delightful woman, but she wouldn't buy my audio courses. She doesn't do audio. So like she might answer the poll and click this to be supportive and sweet, but it's not useful information. The alternative and the reality, you've probably heard this before, is people vote with their wallets. The only way in terms of business, the only way to know what will work is if they buy it or not. You have to create it. You have to offer it to them and then see what they do. Because the same people who raised their hand and said, yeah, I'll buy that, when you release it, they might not buy it because now it's real. Anybody can fill out a form. Anybody can do a quick comment, say, yeah, I'm in. I support this fully. Do you? Now, I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying there are different stakes at play, right? If you said, hey, Joe, if you give me $1 million and I can guarantee to turn into 2 million, would you do it? And I'll say, sure. Then you come to me tomorrow and say, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready for your $1 million. I'm like, oh no, no thanks, right? Because there's actual stakes at play, like the hair on my back kind of stood. Hair on my back. I meant to say hair on my neck and I said hair on my back. That just made it really awkward. Anyway, I got like uncomfortable by just saying that thing. That I actually said I would do that, but now that it's come to actually giving you the $1 million, I'm like, oh, maybe not. Anyway, so people vote with their wallet. So if the answer to the question is what works, sorry, I'm still hung up on that back comment. The question is what works. If the answer is not what people say in surveys or comments, you've probably heard the story of Steve Jobs when he released the iPad. I remember the iPad coming out, and I remember thinking, this is dumb. Like, phones weren't even this big yet. And I remember thinking, this is just a bigger version of my phone, but it doesn't even make calls, and I couldn't even hold it up next to my head. I remember thinking, this is dumb. Nice try, Apple. Turns out it's the biggest product category ever, I think, for them. So Steve Jobs famously said, I don't know if this is true, but the story goes, if I had given people what they wanted, I would have given them, a faster computer. Nobody would have said they wanted this big tablet thing. It was a new category. People didn't even know they wanted it. So he had to make it, almost in a sense, tell them what they want, and then see if they would buy it. And once they figured it out, they realized, oh, this is amazing. So people vote with their wallets. A survey would have said, no, that iPad's a dumb idea, and it would have never existed. Thank goodness Steve Jobs was a highly creative person who actually did the thing rather than just relying on like hearsay of what people may or may not do. My first product, when I started Home Studio Corner, I launched it in April of 2009. I launched it as just a blog with an accompanying YouTube channel. I started making content there, and it took me about 7 months before I created my first product. And I had no clue, zero clue. It was a little course, kind of a 12-week course about music production, if it would sell. It was just kind of the first idea I made that thought, well, it's better than just an ebook because it's actually a course, and I think it might sell. But I had zero idea if it would. I had to create it. I could have done a poll. I might have done a poll or a survey. When I did a poll or survey, people said, make an ebook. That was as big as they could think. That was as big as I could think. I mean, I could have done that. Ebooks are fine, but I wouldn't have been able to charge. What did I sell that first course for? $127 or something for an ebook, probably. Anyway, so that's how do we know what works? We have to do something and then see the results. So here's a big secret, and this is true whether you are in the business world or in some other creative, like whatever niche you're in right now, the thing that's kind of your thing, the topic around which you want to build a business, there are kind of famous experts in that field, right? There are people who have been doing this for a long time. They are considered experts in that field, correct? Perhaps you are one of them. The pros, the experts in any field, even they don't know what's going to work. Even the professionals don't know what's gonna work. Because everything that works is really just a guess up front. So the professionals will guess as to what works, then they'll find out, they'll measure what actually worked. As they get more experience, they become better guessers, but just by the nature of them being professionals, they don't know for sure if something will work. One of my pet peeves, I really don't like this, is when I read an article, or especially if I read a book that's about business, and it starts to paint the entrepreneur, the person who started the business, as like this Nostradamus genius who kind of predicted the future of what would happen. Like I mentioned Steve Jobs. They'll paint him sometimes as this genius. Granted, he probably was a genius who could see into the future. Steve Jobs failed miserably at a lot of things. A lot of things. He had some insane successes as well, but he didn't know. He didn't know that the Macintosh would do well. He had a vision and a dream and a suspicion, but he didn't know. He couldn't know. He didn't know that the iPod would do well. He didn't know that the iPhone, that the iPad, that the MacBook, he didn't know. He just had a commitment to creating an amazing product. He had a good understanding of the market, and it turns out he was right. But there are plenty of times where he wasn't right as well. So even people like that in my industry, the audio world, there are, professional audio engineers. And people might think, oh, when they go to record acoustic guitar, they know exactly where to place the microphone. They don't. They know what has worked for them, and they try it, but they don't know if it works until they've recorded it and listened back on speakers and say, oh, okay, that sounds nice. Or, oh, nope, that's not working. Let's move the mic. Let's change the microphone. Let's change the guitar. They know what to do in response to it not working, but they can't know up front what will work. It's not possible. That's not a dig against professionals. What makes them professionals is that they are really good at guessing, and a lot of times they do guess right, but it's still a guess. Here's another one that hits a little closer to home. I almost didn't want to share this with you. Just this last, as I'm shooting this last week and a half, I met with a friend of mine who we've been in the same industry for a really long time. We haven't done a joint venture together in quite a while. So we put together a fairly inexpensive, $97 program with some live elements to it and sold it to our audiences. And I legitimately thought this is going to do well. I think this will probably bring in about 30 grand. I was thinking about 300 people would buy. It's a $100 thing, 30 grand. 300 times, yeah. And turns out I was wrong by a factor of 3. We brought in a little less than 10 grand, like around 8,500 versus 30 grand. So even though I am an expert in this field, I've been doing this for a really long time, I had a guess and it was worth doing, but it did not get the result that I thought it should based on other factors. Now I can now kind of learn from that and figure out kind of why it worked and why it didn't. I already have some ideas as to why, which were some of my fears going into it, but I can't say I told you so either way. If it did do what I said, I can't really say I told you so because I had an inkling, but I can't know. Now I know. Sadly, the answer was it just did okay versus doing great. It was a base hit versus a home run. That's fine. That's what's fun about this. Sometimes your failures are still you still put money in your pocket, which is cool. All right, really, really quickly, it's talking about this idea of trying things out, guessing, and then seeing what works. That's literally the game plan that I built my business around. I call it the game plan because I was able to distill my entire business model into 4 stages, GAME: give, ask, measure, edit. And you can kind of learn the whole thing. I've got a video and a 1-page diagram of the model that you can have for free. Just go to joegilder.biz/game. That'll let you download the PDF and also watch the video that explains that whole process. The video is actually me drawing the PDF that you've got, which is kind of meta and backwards, but we're into multiple timelines, Marvel, the whole deal. Okay, so what are some things we can take away? So we've talked about creativity, the idea that you have to do things to really know what's going to work, and that all sounds well and good. So then what do we do? I love theoretical content. I love thinking about things, but I also like to just know what to do next. So what I want to share now are kind of 4 steps that you can take using this information to forge your path ahead to figure out what needs to happen. So you'll run into this a lot where you'll hit a crossroads where you'll think, okay, what do I do next? What do I focus on? That can be at the very beginning of the business, but it happens regularly in any endeavor. You get a roadblock and you say, okay, where do we go from here? So the first step of this kind of process is to just do a lot of stuff. I mentioned starting my Home Studio Corner channel back in 2009. I think I produced 2 to 3 YouTube videos a week, plus some articles on the blog for about 7 months before I made a dime. And then that first launch made, I think, $3,000 the first month, and people who were making payments, their payments came in the second month, about $2,000. So about a $5,000 launch. But which was amazing and huge and mind-blowing for me at the time. But it took me making that content for a good 7 months. That doesn't mean that 7 months is the magic formula. That's just what worked for me. Yours might be, 3 years of making content before you make your first dollar based on things. Hopefully not, especially if you follow the stuff we're going to talk about here. But there's an element of, at the beginning, you don't have any data to go from. You have your own experience as a person doing the thing that you're doing, the craft that you're teaching, but you don't know which version of the stuff you're going to make, which pieces of content, for example, will work well. So you just have to create. This channel, this Joe Gilder business channel, I started with the idea of I'm just going to make a weekly video and start to kind of figure out what my voice is here. I know my voice on Home Studio Corner. This place is different because I don't talk about business over on Home Studio Corner, but I can talk about it here. And that took me doing weekly videos for several months before really anybody started watching. And then, just videos were getting a couple hundred views because it's a brand new channel with tiny, no subscribers. And then one video randomly pops off and gets 6,000 views. And then after that, the next several videos have more views than they did before. That's kind of the game you have to play. You just have to make a lot of stuff at first. Now, that's not the end game. A lot of people think, okay, cool, Joe said to make a video every week. I'm going to do that for the next 10 years and I will have millions of dollars. Not necessarily. There was a season of my life where I got really into Casey Neistat, the YouTuber who kind of pioneered the idea of doing daily vlogs, right? Video yourself, doing what you do, make it interesting. So several years ago, I decided I wanted to do a daily vlog. I called it Gilder Cam. And to this day, people still ask me to do more of them. I did it for about a month, maybe 6 weeks of, I think, five videos a week. So daily-ish. And it took up all my time, because I would shoot all day and then I would edit on my laptop in front of the TV all night and then repeat the process the next day, just barely getting the rest of my work done. It became this new creative obsession for me. It never took off. Not a single one of those videos ever got more than a couple thousand views. It was as I looked at it, it was something that I tried that just didn't work. So the point being, I've seen people who have done, this is one guy I saw, he was doing a daily vlog, and he was on like vlog number 900 something. 900, meaning coming up on 3 years of daily videos, assuming it was daily, I'm pretty sure it was, and his 900 something video had like 40 views on it. And I went and looked back on it, like none of them were getting any views. Now, does that mean this person is wasting their life? No, of course not. You can create something and get joy out of the creating of it and be happy with the fact that only a handful of people are watching it. That can be fine. But if you think that just because you created something that's the barrier to entry to success, it's not. It's the first step. Absolutely. For this kind of business, nobody can buy a course from me until they know who I am, and they don't know who I am unless I make content that they eventually discover that brings them into my world, right? That's the business model. But if my content is more self-serving than them serving, then it's not going to get much traction, right? And it's hard because you see the Casey Neistats of the world who make videos all about themselves. There's value in the videos. I get entertainment value from watching them. I learn something occasionally, but it's mostly like I've only been to New York City once, and I've never ridden like electric skateboards around New York City. That looks fun, so I watch his videos to kind of live vicariously through him. That's a business model. That's not the business model that I use. I tried it. I tried doing the daily vlog thing to see if it would blow things up. It didn't for me, but thankfully, that wasn't the only way for me to grow this business. It was a way that I tried that didn't work. So we do a lot of things. The point of all of this is to tell you, to reinforce the idea that you should try doing a lot of things. And then once you've done a lot of things for a season, let's say 3 months, 6 months, whatever, then you perform what's called an 80-20 analysis. Now, I can't explain 80-20 in its entirety here. Should probably make that into its own video. Let me write that down. But the 80-20 principle, if you're not familiar, is also known as the Pareto principle. It's this idea that if I do 100 things, 20 of them will produce 80% of the results. So let's say I make 100 videos, and let's say I get 1 million views. 800,000, that's all right, the math is hard. Let's say I do 100 videos, and I get 100,000 views. 80,000 of those views will come from 20 of those videos. 20% of the videos, which is only 20 out of 100, will account for 80% or 80,000 of the views. That sounds like, yeah, cool, Joe. That's a neat math problem that you stumbled through there, but who cares? It is the truth. It is like a universal principle of distribution of anything. It started off as a theory for how land was distributed. It turns out that 20% of the people owned 80% of the land. But then the person who first studied it, and people, many much smarter people than I who have studied it since, have discovered that it applies to almost everything. You look at salaries in the NBA, you'll find that a small percent make the majority of the money, right? Like 80% of the salaries in the NBA go to 20% of the people. Now, the specific numbers maybe don't match up exactly. I've had it match up, which is creepy, but it's typically a small percent, 10 to 30% accounts for a large percent, 60 to 80% of the thing that you're measuring. So what is that? How does that apply to what we do here? Specifically, let's use YouTube as an example. So you create a bunch of stuff. That was the first step. Then the second step is you do an 80-20 analysis. You look at all the things you created and you see how each of them performed. On YouTube, one of the ways we can see how it performed can be either watch time or views. Views is pretty easy because it's a decent indicator that people were at least clicking on it and interested in it. So I can look and see that, okay, these videos got a lot more views than all these other ones. So then that's telling me, you can just sort by views and see, okay, these 10 videos were kind of the hits. The rest just kind of did meh. So then you focus on those 10 and you analyze them. What made them work? Maybe you watch them all again from start to finish. I did this recently on a video of mine that's been performing well for the last year or so. I literally made a page of notes about what that video did. I rewatched the video, I took a bunch of notes, and now I'm taking the things that I learned from that and I'm trying to apply it moving forward to the videos. I can't know for sure what worked because there's an element of human psychology here and YouTube algorithm and things that I will never fully understand, but I can make some pretty good educated guesses as to why this worked over this other one. And as you do that, you say, okay, I've done an 80-20 analysis and I've seen that these types of videos outperform any other videos. Then the next step, this moves on to step 3, is do more of these types of videos. Take that 20% that you discovered and make that your 80%. Meaning make that, if I do 5 videos a month, I want 4 of them to be the same kind of videos that I had made that are in the 20%. Now you may be thinking, but I've already made those videos. Am I going to make them again? No. Well, yes and no. First of all, just because you've talked about a topic once doesn't mean people don't want to hear you talk about it again, because you'll have a different spin, a different way of thinking about it. You've evolved your own thinking, or they just haven't seen the old video. All of these are reasons to make a video about that again. Maybe you change it up enough to satisfy your own creativity so you're not literally just ripping off a previous video of yours, but you're taking the things you learned from those 20% and you're applying those concepts to the new stuff. So for example, for me, I've discovered in Home Studio Corner that videos about vocals tend to outperform other types of videos. Not always, but typically if I've got a video about recording vocals, mixing vocals, things like that, they tend to perform better. So I make sure that part of my regular mix is a video about vocals that typically has the word vocals in the title and or thumbnail, because that's just a topic that people will always want to know about, and it's been true for years. Recently, I'm a guitar player and I haven't done much about actually playing guitar. I focused on like music production stuff, and I thought that would be an easy one to test. Let's do a video on how to play rhythm guitar, some of the tips that I know that I've never gotten to talk about on this channel, but it makes sense because it's still music related. So I did the video. Did not perform well. It's going to not be in the top 20% of videos. So I tried it, but it didn't quite work. We'll talk about that more in just a second. So we're going to do more of the stuff that works and less of the stuff that doesn't. So that 20% now becomes our 80% of our time, right? We're taking the things that worked and we're going to do more of that to try to kind of get things rolling even more. Does that make sense? You may think, well, if I make the 20% my 80%, won't those then fall prey to the 80-20 rule and only 20% of those will really perform? Yep. That's the point. Let's say like my average views over a period are 100,000 and 20 of those 20% of those videos accounted for 80,000. If I start doing those consistently, the next time I run this experiment, my total views might be 500,000. And then 20% of those videos accounted for 20 or 80% of those views, so 400,000 of those views. And so you keep kind of, it makes me feel like if I'm like driving a stick on a car. And as first gear, I can go, I can rev the engine up and it sounds really awesome. I'm not going that fast yet. So then I downshift, or I shift to the next gear. RPMs drop and I can rebuild up. Then I shift, then I shift, right? So even though I may be at the first round, I was at 5,000 RPMs and I wasn't going very fast. A few shifts later, I'm at 5,000 RPMs and I'm going 80 miles an hour on the interstate. It's the same RPM level, but now I've got a whole lot of momentum behind me. That's the idea here. We're taking the ones that work and we're going to do those more. And then we're going to do the 80-20 analysis again. And of the ones that we did now, we're going to say, okay, of those, probably what's going to happen is 20% of those did way better than the first 20% that we measured. And so we're going to take those and say, okay, what's new about this? What is it about this that worked? And then we make that the new 80% that we spend most of our time on. And then we go again. So we're constantly taking the stuff that works and just doing more of it. But then there's an element of, let's say I do 5 videos a month. I'm going to make 4 of them videos that relate to my top 20% type of videos. But then one of them, I'm going to try something new. Kind of like we did at the beginning. At the beginning, you don't know what's going to work, so you try lots of stuff. Now we know what works, but we don't know what's going to be the next big thing for us. And so we try something new. I did that with the guitar video. It did not work. It's not going to make the cut. But next might be I've been thinking about getting back to doing some live streams where I'm just here in the studio working on music. See if that performs. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to try it. I'm not going to make it my everything. I'm not going to go all in on it until I know it works, but I'm going to try it. And then we're going to see over a period of time if it starts to outperform some of the others. It's kind of like running. I'm not big into, I played sports in high school, but I don't watch a lot of sports at all. But it's the idea, I imagine, of I've got a good team here. I've got my best players, but they're getting older. And I've got new recruits coming out of college every year that I have to recruit and kind of build into. So like my star today might not be my star 2 years from now. So I need to start working on what the next star is going to be. It's kind of the same idea. And as you try new things, you may develop a new 20%. And the key here is be willing to fail your way to success. Be willing to fail your way to success. That means the idea at the beginning of this might not work, that's going to be a constant throughout your career. You are always going to do things that don't work, and that's okay. You got to get to a point where you can be happy about that because you're just testing things out and you're discovering what does work. My son is 13 years old, hasn't played a lot of sports. He's done mountain biking, which is really fun, and recently he's gotten into basketball just a little bit. Out there on the basketball hoop. He didn't have a very good shot, didn't really know how to shoot the ball, so we've been working on that. And it's fascinating to watch him. He's a lot like his dad. He's got a lot of perfectionism in him. So I'll tell him, here's how to shoot, put the ball here, jump and do this with your hand, blah, blah, blah. He'll do it once and he'll miss. And he tends to want to say, the way you're teaching me doesn't work. Because in his head, I think he'll never admit it exactly, but it's part of him thinks, once I learn how to do it, I should just swish it every time. That's, of course, not true. Ideally, you'll get better at shooting. Your percentage of making it will go up, but you'll always miss, and there will always be room for improvement. And that's the idea here in business. Okay, so final piece of advice here. View this whole thing as a game. View it as a game that you play, not as a reflection of who you are as a person. Use the link in the description. Check out the business game plan. It's literally called a game plan. I imagine like I'm the coach, timeout, here's a marker board, we're drawing up a play, go try this. You feel like you're spinning your wheels, here's a plan of how to go through a cycle that's not spinning your wheels, but it's a cycle of constant improvement, which is what we've talked about here, which is what you'll find in that business game plan. Best piece of advice I've ever gotten in business was from one of my favorite people. He's passed away now, but his name is Zig Ziglar. I never met Zig, but we actually both grew up in the same town of Yazoo City, Mississippi. He was one of those original like door-to-door salesmen selling like pots and pans to families in like the 50s and 60s. And he became this kind of world-famous business trainer and motivational speaker, and you can go find a lot of his tapes. He's got this old Southern drawl. But one of the things he said a lot is failure is an event, not a person. Meaning, If I do something that fails, that is an event, that is a thing that happened, that is not a reflection of who I am as a person. I can fail 10 times and still not be a failure, meaning the way I view myself. I don't really care how the world views me, but I can be a success even though the things I'm doing have failed. And the good news is the stuff we've talked about here, you're very unlikely to fail at everything you do. If you develop the habit of looking for that 20% that's working and then doubling down on that and then reallocating your energy based on what you discover, then everything won't be a failure. But early on, it might feel that way. You might try 10 things and they might all not work. You may have to try 100 things before you find one that works, but that failure is just kind of the price of admission. It's not a reflection of who you are. It's just an event. Failure is an event, not a person. That's it for this video. If you need a little more help in getting started, you feel like you're waiting for someone to give you permission to start, highly recommend watching this video as your next choice. Thanks for watching. I'll see you.